My name is Zach, and I'm one of the pastors here at Restore. We're a church where anyone has a seat at the table and everyone can experience the extravagant love of Jesus. So no matter who you are, what you've done, or where you are in your spiritual journey, you are not just welcome here, you are wanted here. If that sounds like a community that you'd like to be a part of, we would love for you to join in. We have Sunday gatherings, Restore groups, and volunteer opportunities, both here in Austin and through our online community made up of folks living all over the place. You can visit our website at restoreaustin.org, or you can find us on YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook to learn more and get connected. Now, if you want to dive deeper into specific topics like racial justice or biblical interpretation, LGBTQ+ inclusion, deconstruction, or much more, we have a great resource list at restoreaustin.org/resources. Now, I hope you enjoy this week's message.
14th chapter of the Gospel of Mark. Jesus had just fed 5,000 people from a few loaves and fishes, and a spontaneous party erupted among the people. We have a new king for Israel, King Jesus. Problem was, Jesus did not want to be the new king of Israel. He left, went up into the mountains alone, and told the 12 to go back down and cross the Sea of Galilee. You can see them making their way back to the seaside. Yeah, the time seems so right for him to proclaim himself king, but they follow his instruction. They head across the sea, and a terrible storm kicks up just like that. And to make matters worse, they look out on the water, and a ghost is walking toward them. The ghost speaks. He says, "Take courage, it is I." Interesting word, courage. I always thought to be courageous meant to step forward without any fear whatsoever, but finally it occurred to me, that is not courage, that is stupidity. Now, courage is stepping forward even though you are absolutely filled with fear, and Peter rather courageously thought he'd heard that voice before. And he said, "Lord, if that's you, tell me to walk to you on the water." So Jesus said, okay. Walk to me in the water. So Peter got out of the boat and he walked on the water. You ever done that? I've never done that. I don't know anybody who's ever done that. Well, actually, I take that back. When I was a kid growing up in northern Ohio, I used to go to this conference every summer at Round Lake Christian Assembly, which had a big round lake. And one night they decided to do a Bible reenactment of this story. And in the middle of the lake, they had this floating dock. And it was so cool. They put just enough ballast into the tanks of the dock to take it right down to water level. So it really looked like Jesus was walking on the water. I mean, it was so cool. Only problem was Jesus couldn't tell where the edge of the dock was. And he fell into the water, and that's when we discovered Jesus didn't swim all that well. So the disciples had to save him, kind of ruin the impact of the whole thing. Did the rest of the disciples get out of the boat? Nope. Only one the courage to get out of the boat and walk in the water was Peter. Oh, I knew. He took his eyes off Jesus, fell into the water, cried, "Lord, save me." That's not the important point. The important point is that he had the courage to get out of the boat in the first place. You know, there comes a time in life when it's time to get out of the boat. I knew from the time I was 4 or 5 years of age, I was transgender. In my naivete, somehow I thought I got to choose. I thought a gender fairy would arrive and say, "Okay, what's it going to be?" But alas, no gender fairy arrived, so I just lived my life. I didn't hate being a boy. I just knew I wasn't one. Went to college, got married, had kids, built a career. But the call toward authenticity has all the subtlety of a smoke alarm, and eventually decisions have to be made. And so I came out as transgender and promptly lost every single one of my jobs. I had never had a bad review. I lost every single job. In all 50 states of the United States, you cannot be fired for being transgender, but in all 50, you can be fired if you're transgender and you work for a religious corporation. Good to know. It's not easy being a transgender woman. People often ask me, "Do you feel 100% like a woman?" And I say, well, first of all, if you've talked to one transgender person, you've talked to exactly one transgender person. I'm not going to try to answer for anybody else. I feel 100% like a transgender woman. I feel like I come from the liminal space between genders, from the borderlands of gender. I mean, there are plenty of things a cisgender woman knows that I will never know. That said, I'm learning a lot about what it means to be a woman, and I'm learning a lot about my former gender, and I'm here to tell you the differences are massive. Let's start with the little stuff. The pockets on women's jeans. Utterly useless. Why do they even bother? I bought a pair of jeggings a couple of months ago. You know, they have stitching there that makes you think there's a pocket, but no, there's no pocket there. Whole thing's a trick. I speak at a lot of corporations all over the world. A couple of years ago, I spoke at the Levi's headquarters in San Francisco. This is my chance. I'll find out about the pockets on women's jeans. They just said, yeah, it's always been that way. Well, I said, just because it's always been that way doesn't mean it has to continue to, whatever. Or the size of a woman's wardrobe. As a guy, I had a couple of pairs of jeans, a couple of pairs of khakis, a couple of blue sport coats, 2 suits. I mean, really, what do you need? As a woman, I have closets and closets full of clothes. Because people will notice if you wear something too often. Well, men won't notice because they're men. But women will notice, and they will judge you for it. Here's a phrase you will never hear spoken to a man. You will never hear anybody say to a man, oh, dude, that is not a good haircut for a man over 50. Because we don't care if a man looks like he's over 50 or 60 or 70 for that matter, but a woman, people say, who's your hairdresser? As if to say, do you really even have a hairdresser? And if you do, does she know you are over 50? There's no way a well-educated white male can understand how much the culture's tilted in his favor. There's no way he can understand that he's already started halfway to the finish line. There's no way he can understand that because it's all he's ever known and all he ever will know. And conversely, there's no way for a woman to understand the full import of that because being a woman is all she's ever known. I mean, she might have an inkling. She's working twice as hard for 75% as much, but really, she has no idea how much more difficult life is for her than it is for the guy in the Brooks Brothers jacket in the office across the hall. I know. I was that guy. And the truth is, I will not live long enough to lose my white male entitlement. I brought it with me when I transitioned. But that does not mean I do not see my power diminishing. So not long after transitioning, I was brought onto the board of a sizable nonprofit. We have a big annual conference. We had a brand new CEO. So we were talking in a board meeting about the wisdom of having the CEO give a keynote at the conference. And I said, well, she's not a seasoned speaker. It might be better if we just interview her. But hey, if you want her to give a keynote speech, I'm happy to coach her. At which point, a powerful white man in the room, who may or may not have been from your town, said, well, if we're going to do that, why don't we hire a real coach? Now, I knew a number of women there knew my credentials. I waited for one of them to speak up on my behalf. No one did. That's another conversation for another day. I can tell you what I wanted to say. I wanted to say, I've done 3 TED Talks that have had 10 million views. I'm a speaker's ambassador for TED. I'm a coach for the largest TEDx in North America. I've taught speech in 3 universities, 2 in the United States, 1 in Europe. Tell me what part about that does not make me a real coach? But instead, I said nothing because I had learned by then, if you say something, well, now you're just that woman. If I could go back and tell Paul, my previous self, if I could go back and tell Paul just one thing, it would be this. Assume a woman knows what she's talking about and treat her accordingly. Yeah, well, that and one other thing. Stop interrupting us. Seriously, guys, just stop interrupting us. Do you know that men interrupt women twice as often as they interrupt other men? Not easy being a transgender woman, and over the last 10, 12 years, it's not gotten any easier. So on January 21st, 2021, it was my great honor to speak for the inaugural prayer service of President Biden. I spoke for the president, the vice president, their families, members of Congress. It was absolutely wonderful. 4 years later to the day, January 21st, 2025, I was sitting at my desk reading an executive order that had been signed the day before that said, I, as a transgender person, do not exist. Well, what a difference 4 years can make. I was talking about that on NPR a couple of months ago, and I said I had renewed my passport back in November, and I'm very glad I did, because had I renewed it in February, it would have had the wrong gender on it. But later on, after the show aired, I thought, was that a smart thing to have said on national radio? I mean, how do I know there was not somebody listening to that who had the authority to cancel my passport and issue a new one in the wrong gender? That's how paranoid we've gotten if we're trans over the last few years. But then I thought about it a little later, and I thought, oh, yeah, it was NPR. I have nothing to worry about. None of those people would have been listening to NPR. It is not a great time in the United States to be transgender, or an immigrant, or anybody who is able to benefit from diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. And we need your help. We need your help now. First of all, we need allies. Allies who would speak up on our behalf. Not many people speaking up on behalf of the transgender world right now. So in his State of the Union address, Donald Trump spent 10 minutes railing against immigrants, 5 minutes railing against transgender people. And in the Democratic response, not a word about transgender people. And only one tiny comment about immigrants. That's not going to cut it. We need people who are willing to speak up on our behalf, and yet everybody's terrified to speak up about trans people right now because they know that's what lost the election for Democrats. And the truth is, it is a very complicated subject, way more complicated than most on the far left or the far right want to admit. The far left has overreached on this subject, and now we're paying the price for that. And the truth is, you've got to do some work to figure out where the truth lies as it relates to trans issues, and nobody seems to want to do that work. But we need you to do that work, to be able to speak on our behalf and understand the nuance of gender. We need allies. We also need apprentices. You know, as an ally, you're the one who decides what you're going to do, what you're going to say for the sake of another group. But as an apprentice, you're working at the direction of the group you're serving. We need apprentices to help us in this difficult environment. We also need people who are a part of religious communities who are willing to say, religion is good for the species. Somehow we've all gotten to think religion is bad for the species. The problem is not religion. The problem is certain kinds of religion. Do you know we as a species never took off when we stayed at the level of blood kin? We just didn't really take off until we moved from the level of blood kin to the level of tribe. That's when civilizations began to develop. That's when we began making huge strides forward. And what brought us together as tribes? It was not our need for safety, what most people assume. What brought us together as tribes was our search for meaning. Think Stonehenge, or the carved bodies of Rapa Nui, or burial mounds of indigenous Americans. It was our search for meaning that brought us together. There is not a culture in the history of mankind that has not had robust religious communities. We need robust religious communities today. I do not know why we have ceded that to the far right. It's time we grab it back ourselves. And here's the good news. There are churches in the United States that are grabbing control of the narrative. Probably fewer than a dozen with a big influence over the whole nation. And I'm not sure if you realize you are one of those dozen. Your church has a huge impact on churches around the nation that are watching to see what happens here. And yes, your pastor is one of the leaders in the post-evangelical movement. We desperately need him and his leadership gifts and style. And the fact that you're willing to loan him to us for that national work is way more important than you could understand. The work he is doing is extremely important because we can be those robust religious communities that change the narrative. We also need people who are willing to focus on Jesus. Jonathan Rauch is an interesting guy, an intellectual from New England, and writer for the Atlantic, the New York Times. And he wants the world to know that he's a gay Jewish atheist. Why does he want them to know that? Because he has a new book out. The book is called Cross Purposes. And in that book, this gay Jewish atheist says, who knew that Christianity was a load-bearing wall of American democracy? I'm going to say that again. Who knew that Christianity was a load-bearing wall of American democracy? He says the problem is the mainline Protestant world has abandoned Jesus on the left for a nebulous spirituality, and on the right, evangelicalism has abandoned Jesus for Christian nationalism, and nobody is just preaching Jesus. There's a 22nd chapter of the Gospel of Matthew. It was the very last day that Jesus was ever going to work with large crowds and speak before big groups of people. This was the last day he would ever be taking questions from the crowd. It was kind of like a press conference. There were 3 questions asked, and the last public question he was ever asked was a very important one. Which of the laws are the greatest? There were 613 of them. Jesus did not hesitate. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and love your neighbor as you love your own self. They were not surprised with his answer. They began every one of their religious services quoting those laws. It's what he said next that blew them away. He said, on this are all the law and the prophets based. In other words, it's not so much about that 613 laws. It's just about these things. Loving God, loving neighbor, and loving yourself. And you can't do the first 2 if you haven't done the third. To love God, the God who burst on the scene 14 billion years ago in all of God's complexity, mystery, and ever-expansiveness, rooted in relationship and grounded in love. Yeah, I just defined the Big Bang and more. The Big Bang, to worship the God who burst on the scene 14 billion years ago in all of God's mystery, complexity, and ever-expansiveness, and then rooted in relationship and grounded in love. You know, quantum physics tells us that the key building blocks of the universe are not made of matter. The key building blocks of the universe are a pattern of relationships between non-material entities. So the key building blocks of the universe are relationships. And if the key building blocks of the universe are relationships, then is it that much of a stretch to say the most powerful force in the world is love? We need to love that God. The God who burst on the scene 14 billion years ago in all of God's complexity, mystery, and ever-expansiveness, rooted in relationship and grounded in love. We need to love our neighbors, particularly those who do not look like us. And we need to love ourselves, and if you cannot love yourself, you cannot do the other 2. After I transitioned, I was having a pretty difficult time loving myself. I lost all my jobs. I lost literally thousands of friends. Probably in my denomination, where I was a national leader, I knew over 1,000, 2,000 people by name. Since I transitioned 12 years ago, I've had substantive conversations with exactly 6 of those people. I lost virtually all of my friends. And I lost my parents. My father was a fundamentalist pastor. My mother, even more conservative than my father. She demanded that he disown me, and he acquiesced, and they disowned me. But I knew my dad, and I knew it wasn't his heart. So I took a chance and called him on his 93rd birthday. He took my call. We talked for about a half hour. It was a good conversation. And so a couple of weeks later, I called again, and I asked if I could come for a visit. And he said yes. And then shortly before the visit, he called to tell me my mother would be there, which was quite a surprise. And on a warm April day in central Kentucky, I sat down with my parents for 3 hours. It was wonderful. And as I stood to go, my father stood up with me and he said, Paula? He called me Paula. First time he ever had called me Paula. And from that day on, that's all he called me was Paula. He said, Paula, I do not understand this, but I am willing to try. Dad was 93 years old, and he was willing to try. That's getting out of the boat. I lost him 5 years ago last month. I miss him so much. We need people with the courage to get out of the boat. One of my favorite poets is Mary Oliver, and her poem, The Journey, keeps coming to mind. One day you knew what you had to do and began, though the voices around you kept shouting their bad advice. One day you knew what you had to do and began, though the voices around you kept shouting their bad advice. Though the whole house began to tremble and you felt the old tug at your ankles. Mend my life, each voice cried, mend my life, but you didn't stop. You knew what you had to do. Though the wind was prying with its stiff fingers at the very foundations, though their melancholy was terrible. It was already late enough, and a wild night, and the road full of fallen branches and stones. But little by little, as you left their voices behind, as you left their voices behind, as you left their voices behind, the stars began to burn through the sheets of clouds, and there was a new voice, a new voice, a new voice, which you slowly recognized as your own, that kept you company as you strode deeper and deeper into the world, determined to do the only thing you could do, determined to save the only life you could save. Will you pray with me? Give us courage, God, to overcome our fear and to answer your call, which we know in our gut. We know what your call is. We always know what your call is. We just don't want to answer it. Give us the courage to answer your call to get out of the boat. This is our prayer, and we pray in the name of Christ. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much, Paula. I've gotten to hear you speak a few different times, and you're an incredibly gifted communicator. But the other thing you do really well is the live surprise Q&A, which I'm going to do right now. No, it's not a surprise. I told you we were going to.
You mean the hot seat?
The hot seat. You've been paying attention. Yeah. We're going to race right now. No, I'm just kidding. Just kidding.
I do run 6 days a week, you know.
You would beat me then.
6 days a week. Have been for 50 years.
That's very impressive.
Yep, and I am older than dirt. I am way older than you think I am, trust me.
Well, I just want to ask
you. And here's the other thing. I could beat you. Pretty confident.
Oh, wow, okay.
As long as it's a long enough distance.
That's what it is.
Yeah.
That's what it is. Yeah, I'm a sprinter.
Yeah.
I got the sprinter's build, if you can't see.
Okay.
I want to end with two questions for you. So the first one is, you mentioned that the kind of polarized rhetoric around trans folks is ultimately unhelpful and damaging, really, in a lot of ways. And so for people who want to take that step out of the boat, to courageously be allies and apprentices, what's a good first step in this world that we're living in right now?
Yeah, I'm getting ready to do another TED Talk, and I have a book proposal with my agent right now, and the title of the book is When Their Enemy Is You, Responding with Grace and an Open Heart and a Receptive Spirit. And I think that is what I need to be doing right now. And when we speak, we need to speak with wisdom. Right now, we have great polarization, and the truth is that anytime you have great polarization, the one thing that gets lost is the truth. The truth is usually in the middle. And right now, the left has overreached on issues related to trans folks, and that's what we're paying the price for. That overreach is based on a lot of passion, which is a good thing, but it's not always based on data. I'm a therapist by trade. That's what my doctorate's in. And I need to see the data on transgender issues. And a lot of what we see in the far left is passion and no data. And what we see in the far right is passion and no data. And we need you to be informed. And I know right now that's the last thing you want to think about. But we need you to be informed. But you can do little things. Last Sunday's New York Times Magazine, a week ago, great article. Now, a lot on the left don't like the article. A lot on the right don't like the article. That's usually a good sign. You also could read my blog. And yes, I still have a blog. I did already say I'm older than dirt, but it's paulastonewilliams.com. And I tend to try to approach these things. It's one of the reasons I've been asked to do NPR and PBS is because I'm willing to talk about the subject with nuance. And we need people who are willing to dig into the nuance of what the issues are. Sorry, that's a long answer.
No, that was fantastic. And you've educated me tremendously over the years, and I'm so helpful, or it's been so helpful, and I'm so appreciative. One thing that you've said to me directly, and then I've heard you say it a couple of times more broadly that's been really helpful, is you've said, I want you to treat me as if my being transgender is completely incidental to who I am until it's not. And that was such a helpful way of kind of understanding how to best offer support. And so would you unpack that statement a little bit for us?
You know, most of us, and again, I can only speak for myself, but the majority of us who are trans, we just want to live in the world. That's all we want to do. And so for you to treat the fact that we're transgender as just incidental, that's actually what we prefer. Let me give you an example. I'm the mayor pro tem in my town in Colorado. And so at the last election cycle, we were all talking about running again. And I said, I'm going to run again, but there is no guarantee I'll be elected this time. I mean, the world has kind of turned against trans people over the last 4 years. And, you know, how do I know I'll be elected? And every one of the mayor and all the rest of the board members were like, oh, that's right. We always forget that you're trans. That's what I mean. Until they don't forget that I'm trans. And they have been so supportive of me recently, particularly after January 21st this year. And we saw the nation begin to turn against us in so many ugly ways. They just come along and say, you okay? You know, in the same way I do to our mayor, who happens to be Jewish in an area that's very supportive of Palestinians. I just say, hey, Holly, you okay? That's what we need, yeah.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much for being here. Let's give Paula one more round of applause. Can I give you a hug? Thank you.